In 17th century Europe, intellectuals collided with a severe crisis of authority. The assumption that the past held absolute truth was beginning to crack. Thinkers split into two bitter factions: the ancients, who defended the classical past, and the moderns, who advocated for the potential of the present. For the traditionalists, the debate was settled before it began. Looking at the vast output of antiquity, they argued that Greek and Roman writers had already reached the absolute ceiling of literary perfection. The blueprints were set in stone. Progressive thinkers posed a dangerous counter-question. Armed with the advantage of historical hindsight, could modern writers equal or even surpass the ancient masters? This friction echoed the broader scientific and philosophical revolutions of the era. Across Europe, established religious and scientific dogmas were being tested by empirical observation and new technologies. The argument over poetry and plays served as a proxy for a much larger battle over epistemology. Society was trying to determine exactly how we measure and define perfection. English poet John Dryden engineered a methodological solution to this intellectual gridlock in 1668 with his text An Essay of Dramatic Poesy. Rather than writing a standard essay, Dryden constructed a fictional dialogue. He placed 4 speakers in a boat on the River Thames, forcing them to debate the mechanics and principles of drama. 2 specific characters serve as the avatars for our central conflict: Chrytis, who defends the ancients, and Eugenius, who advocates for the moderns. Dryden forces the reader to weigh the evidence. He deliberately builds strong, impartial cases for both men before offering any judgment of his own. Previous critics operated as dictators, issuing rigid literary rules from a position of absolute, unquestionable authority. They demanded obedience, not analysis. By staging a rigorous dialectical debate instead of issuing a decree, Dryden stripped away dictatorial authority. He invented the modern framework of comparative literary criticism. We begin with Chrytis. His entire worldview rests on a single, uncompromising premise: classical authority demands our unquestioning respect. He points to titans like Homer, Sophocles, and Virgil, treating them as architects of the craft, the absolute, immovable standards by which every subsequent work is measured. Chrytis argues that the ancients did not merely write well by accident. They systematically discovered the true, objective principles of dramatic art. Because the ancients invented these principles from nothing, their sheer originality secures their permanent superiority over anyone who follows. Under Chrytis' logic, the modern writer has only one valid job description: strict imitator. Their task is to execute the established ancient blueprints without deviation. Classical literature has survived the brutal test of centuries. Chrytis concludes that this survival makes the ancients entirely immune to modern criticism. Artistic success, in the traditionalist view, does not come from independent invention. It is achieved strictly through discipline and total compliance to historical authority. Chrytis champions the 3 unities, represented by tight geometric boundaries. First, unity of action. Plays follow a single, unbroken plot. Subplots are forbidden. Next, unity of time. Every event occurs within a 24-hour window. Finally, unity of place. Action is confined to one primary location. Chrytis argues these unities are vital because they force realism. A play occurring in real time, in one place, feels highly convincing and orderly to an audience watching it unfold. By stripping away excess variables, this strict framework forces a writer to perfect their central plot. It maintains emotional control and artistic dignity. Characters placed inside this framework are not designed to have messy, idiosyncratic quirks. They are constructed to represent universal human qualities and overarching moral ideals. The 3 unities function as a structural cage. They are explicitly designed to prevent narrative chaos and guarantee a perfectly balanced, predictable artistic output. Eugenius respects this classical structure, but he breaks entirely from Chrytis' conclusions. Here is Eugenius's countermodel. He views literature as an evolving discipline, scaling in complexity over time. Modern writers inherit ancient wisdom as their base layer. Standing on this foundation grants them a higher vantage point to see further than the Greeks ever could. Eugenius makes a bold claim. The ancient dramatists were not infallible gods. They made structural mistakes. He points directly to classical works plagued by weak plots, improbable incidents, and imperfect characterization. Modern writers study these specific ancient failures to avoid reproducing them. By breaking the unity of action, they introduce intersecting subplots, expanding outward into a much greater variety of storylines. This newfound complexity gives modern dramatists the room to accurately map human psychology. They can write characters with actual emotional depth rather than flat moral avatars. Eugenius argues that modern writers are serving audiences living in vastly different social and political conditions than ancient Athenians. The literature must reflect that modern reality. Blind imitation stunts growth. To stay relevant, writers have to break classical constraints so their work resembles the dense complexity of real life. Having built both cases, Dryden delivers his final, balanced verdict. He refuses to side entirely with either man. While Dryden allows Eugenius's progressive arguments to land with more persuasive force, he completely rejects the idea of abandoning classical tradition. This final animation models Dryden's concept of moderation. He merges the two philosophies, combining deep respect for established principles with creative imagination. The classical rules, the unities Crites worships, are no longer viewed as unquestionable laws. Instead, they serve as an indispensable internal classical skeleton. Around that skeleton, modern creativity and psychological depth flesh out the narrative, adapting the old principles to contemporary needs without losing stability. In Dryden's view, originality and imitation cease to be enemies. They are complementary forces that require each other to function. Dryden solves the 17th century debate by proving a mechanical reality. If you want to scale a narrative's complexity, you need a robust structural physics to prevent the whole thing from collapsing. This careful, deliberate weighing of structure against innovation established John Dryden as the father of English literary criticism. The legacy of An Essay of Dramatic Poesy is a massive shift in intellectual mindset. It moved critics away from dogmatic obedience to the past and toward a confident, analytical approach to the present. Dryden proved to subsequent generations that it was possible to reject blind hero worship without destroying the traditions that built their culture. Dryden's practical criticism transformed literary analysis into a study of comparative systems. By evaluating how modern innovations rely on ancient structural foundations, he provided the tools to judge any work, from a restoration play to a modern screenplay, by the internal logic of its own construction. A discipline only truly evolves when it learns to weaponize the structural mechanics of its past to solve the complex problems of its present.